I am very excited to welcome the man, the myth, the legend, Jim Rogers, back to the show. Welcome back, Jim.
I am delighted to be here, Elliot. I guess it's good evening where you are. Good morning where I am.
From my perspective, since 2008, every risk asset has pretty much been correlated 100% to the Fed's next move. So if they taper, everyone freaks out. And if they print money and lower rates, everything's risk on, right? Gold, silver, everything. It just doesn't matter. And so even now, it seems like the Fed has an iron grip on the markets, threatening a taper, even whispering a taper, and the market's freaking out. So, and it does seem also like at the same time that market fundamentals are completely irrelevant, right? So the question is, are market fundamentals at this time irrelevant, and will they be for the foreseeable future because of this?
Elliot, never before in history has there been so much money printing by all the central banks at the same time. We've had money printing before here and there, and sometimes many places, but never have you had so much money printing by so many central banks, so much borrowing, so much spending. So this is unique in that period, just the magnitude of it. And whether we like it or not, all of that money sloshing around has to go somewhere. I mean, if you want to build a factory or build a highway, it takes a long time. But if you want to go online, you can go online and put lots of money to work very, very, very quickly. And that's what's been happening. And whether we like it or not, doesn't matter. Those are the facts. Now, I don't particularly like it because it's going to come to an end someday. And I've been around long enough to know that when it comes to an end, a lot of people are going to suffer, maybe even me. I mean, I hope I don't, but I do know that a lot of people are going to suffer and suffer badly.
It does seem that the Fed has an iron grip right now, right? Still.
Well, Elliot, it cannot go on forever. Anything that's too good to be true is too good to be true. And eventually they run out of trees if they keep printing money and printing money and printing money. Eventually something happens and it comes to an end. And this will come to an end too. All of the signs are starting to gather. Bubbles are starting to form. New people are rushing into the market and telling their friends, oh, there's this new thing called the stock market, and it's so much fun, and it's so easy, and you can make money. And they all rush in, and then SPACs come around often at the end of long bull markets. SPACs have been around for 300 years, but they often rise again whenever there's a long bull market. I mean, this is not my first rodeo. I've seen all this before, but even if I hadn't, you can look it up, read about it. It always happens, and it's happening again. But Elliot, it does always come to an end eventually.
And what is the trigger generally for that? So what would possibly cause people to all of a sudden, the Fed says, we're going to taper, and then they say, oh, I don't care. Or they say, we're going to lower rates. And they just say, I just don't care anymore. I'm just going to cash out. Like, what would cause that?
Well, various and sundry things. War can cause people to get out of markets. Central banks can realize the mistake. They can change their mind and stop printing money and start raising interest rates, start cutting back. Various things have caused this to happen in the past. It used to be a signal that some people used was when the central bank raised interest rates 3 times. 1, 2, 3. First time scared people, but then it rallied. Second time scared people, rallied again. But the third time was out. You better get out. Now, who knows? I don't know if that's going to be the case again this time, but I'm certainly watching like everybody else. I haven't sold out yet, haven't sold short yet, but I'm certainly worried because I see bubbles forming in many countries, in many asset classes.
They're just rising and falling all over the place. And so it does kind of bring to my mind a comment you made a while back about buying Japanese stocks because the central bank was buying Japanese stocks and they have way more money than you do. And therefore, they're going to prop it up. Is that not a similar situation in America?
Well, no, of course, it's happening everywhere. I mean, not everywhere, but nearly everywhere. The Chinese, amazingly enough, have been less crazy than the rest of us. They've been a little more restrained. But even they have certainly borrowed and printed and spent a lot of money. Nearly everybody has been doing it. I'm sure if I looked at North Korea hasn't been doing it, but nearly most places have been getting involved with to some degree or another.
Yeah, and I guess what you're saying is that can backstop a stock market, and I guess no one knows when it'll crash, but it will crash at some point, right?
Well, I don't know. If you watch an early stage investor, maybe they'll tell you.
Maybe. It's just such a fascinating time, right? Because of all this. So and then just thinking about Japan again, haven't they already tried this experiment? And with the helicopter money, right? And they had a lost decade. That's what I always kind of point to. I say, look, Japan, they had a massive bubble, even bigger on a magnitude than the United States in terms of like a percentage gain basis. So could we still at least see that much gain before this correction that you're talking about?
Of course, we often, may go the other way. We have the correction, and then we have the central banks panic, and they print even more money, and then we have the wild blow off. Often we have blow offs in market when they get out of hand. Comes a time where just everything goes up every day. It used to be called a blow off. I guess it still would be called a blow off if we have one. Sure, why not? If the central banks panic, which they might, if things do go down for, Elliot, all they care about are their jobs. They don't care about you and me. They care about keeping their jobs. So if they suddenly get worried, they could print even more money and buy even more assets. Sure, why not? We've had blow-offs in history all over the world. It's not as though this cannot happen. It has happened many times. I don't know. My present inclination is that I would expect a blow-off before this ends. But who knows?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because it is true. Even the SPACs you were talking about, the tech stocks, they have been soft all year long. It doesn't exactly feel like a blow-off top end to a massive money printing bubble. But so I agree. You could see maybe another, big pump and dump. But the question is, like, what are investors to do? Because most people try to be fundamental investors. They try to go for hard assets. They try to, invest based on the fundamentals, and it just doesn't seem to work. So how should investors operate in this environment?
Well, if you want to survive, you just stay with what you know. Because when things start going wrong, if you don't know what you're doing, you're really going to get whipsawed all sorts of different ways. If you don't know what's happening and you don't know what you're doing, get out. I mean, you don't have to stay in the markets all the time. Yeah, you might miss something for a while. So what? I promise you, it's better to miss something for a while than to lose everything when things go really wrong. So my advice is just stay with what you yourself know. And if you don't know, stay out. If you want to jump in and out, go to it. But I don't know how to tell you to do it. Maybe you can go on the internet or the TV or something. That's not the way I do it, but who knows?
So does that mean you're sticking true to the fundamentals and not just chasing the lowest quality tech stock?
I can't say just with the fundamentals because there are no fundamentals around right now. I have to stay with the fundamentals of markets that I have seen over the years and read about over the years, that these things do happen. And at the end of long bull markets, we sometimes do have blow-offs. So we have a lot of new people coming in and getting very excited and carried away. And things do strange things. I've been around long enough to know this can happen and try to judge it and try to get it right. But Elliot, you think I know what I'm doing? No, I don't know what I'm doing any more than anybody else. Just I maybe have more experience than others.
Yeah, I guess the only difference is that you'll admit it, but and no one else will. But then there are the kind of, people calling for the end of the American empire, right? This is it. This is the absolute end because we're indebted. We haven't been this indebted since World War II. But if you look at the end of World War II, we somehow managed to get out of it, right? So what do you kind of see, just at least for America, because this is, still the biggest economy?
Well, there is no question that America is now the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. That is not good. we had big debts at the end of World War II, but we also had gigantic savings, which had been forced by the Depression and by the war. During the war, there were all sorts of controls and restrictions. And so America had big savings offsetting its big debt. And we paid off the debt with the savings and the boom, which happened after the war, because we had all this capacity. We built a lot of factories during the war. So America had capacity, savings, to offset the debt. We don't have any savings now, Elliot. We don't have any excess capacity or much excess capacity now. No, it's a very different situation from the late 1940s. We are the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. We are overextended militarily all over the world. We have troops in over 100 countries. We certainly didn't have troops in over 100 countries in the 1940s. So we are doing things which may cause us to have problems down the road. They certainly have in history caused other countries to have problems. And if that's the case, the end of the American empire may be a bit of a stretch, but it certainly could be the top. And in the 1920s, the UK was the richest, most powerful country in the world. There was no number two. 50 years later, Elliot, they were bankrupt. IMF had to fly to London airport and bail them out, literally bail out what had been the richest, most powerful country in the world only 50 years before. So it has happened throughout history, can happen, will happen. When it happens to us, I don't know, but I do know it's going to happen to us because I can look out the window and see the debt. Look at all that debt, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. So America is certainly making a top. I don't particularly like saying it, but I have to deal with facts. But I don't think Mississippi River is going to dry up, go away. I don't think the Rocky Mountains are going to collapse. America's still going to be there, but it'll certainly be different, just as the UK was different.
And then just thinking about kind of the two different camps in the market right now, you have the commodities investors that see the inflation spiking all over the world, and they're saying, this is it, right? This is when hyperinflation, hits America, and, the money printing, everything that comes home to roost. And it's like the 1970s all over again. Oil spikes, and that causes just massive inflation, and gold and silver spike as well. What do you think about that argument at this time?
Well, I certainly can see inflation is here. I can certainly see gigantic money printing, which has always led to inflation throughout history. So, yes, I certainly expect inflation. I'm prepared for inflation. I own some silver. I own some gold. I own commodities. I've certainly been investing in commodities. Commodities is the only asset class that are not expensive now. Bonds are a bubble. Bonds have never been this expensive in history. Stocks are beginning to form some bubbles. Property, oh my gosh, go to Korea, go to New Zealand, go many places. Property is a huge bubble in many parts of the world. Commodities are the only thing that are not. Silver's down 60% from its all-time high. Sugar's down 60%. Many commodities are still down a lot. So that's the only place I know of where there's not a bubble and where things are still cheap. And historically, money printing has led to inflation. And if you own the things that go up in price, you might even make a lot of money. If we're going to have electric cars use a lot more copper than gasoline cars. So there are ways to make money, I hope, if one is attentive and stays prepared.
That's the argument that, pretty much what we've seen this year, which is just spiking commodity prices. And the question is it transitory? Will it go back down as soon as all this COVID lockdown stuff goes away, which clearly isn't going away anytime soon? Or will it actually cause kind of a 1970s style spike? That's the real question at this point.
It doesn't have to be that. History usually doesn't repeat itself. It does rhyme, of course. Whether it's like the 70s or not, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. If commodity prices go up, they went up in the 70s, but they've been up many times in history. You go back through history, you'll see we've had long periods when commodities go up for a while, then they go down for a long period of time. maybe we're in one of those periods again, whether it's like the 70s or not. If you own them and they go up, you don't care what it's like. All you care is, oh my gosh, they're going up and I own them and I'm making money. So I don't know if it's like, we certainly had a lot of money printing then, had a lot of excess spending then, but we've never had spending like we have now. I don't think we've ever had money printing like we're having now. Yeah, we've had, as I said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
Yep. And, but I guess the big question is, right, so if this all does come to an end eventually, which it has to, it's just a matter of when, then wouldn't that big deflationary bust just cause everything to just crater, including pretty much all commodities as well?
Well, perhaps you can certainly have the blow off in commodities too. But what you just said, yes, you will. When everything starts cratering, nearly everything goes down. But you have had periods in history when some things do go up. I mean, there were stocks that went up in the Depression in the 30s. Not many, but there were some where you could have made a lot of money if you own the right things. And sure, the price of 2008, for instance, the price of gold went down a lot for a while. It was one of the first things to turn around and go up. And probably, as long as they print money, I would suspect that commodities will go higher. But if they just stop printing money and the whole thing collapses, I don't know what you can. You better know how to sell short. But even short sellers can get hurt in times like that because crazy things, crazy distortions happen.
We are seeing a lot of firsts in these, really interesting times. Like you just said, the most money printing ever, the most debt ever. And so, another kind of thesis that's coming out of this, and there's always some excuse for a stock market bubble, but currently it's kind of the exponential age thesis, saying for the first time in human history, all revolutionary technologies are converging. You have AI, you have robotics, you have 3D printing, you have just, and the exponential age thesis saying that productivity is going to go through the roof, growth is going to go through the roof. Commodities are going to suffer because they're going to be cheaper to get out of the ground, right? Because of the new developments and whatnot. And so these technologies all converging at this one point in human history where it's growing exponentially will kind of like take us out of this mess because of the rise in growth and the rise in productivity. And there will be this epic bubble form in these technologies again. Do you see that kind of being an optimistic outcome of all this?
So this time it's different.
Right.
This time the world is different. Well, Elliot, I have learned throughout my life and throughout reading that whenever people say this time it is different, you better leave the room. You better go. We have often, in the late 1990s, we had a bubble in the United States because of the internet and technology. And the Wall Street Journal started writing about the new economy, capitalized, because it was so important, the changes that were taking place. After the bubble collapsed, they stopped capitalizing the new economy and stopped writing about the new economy. But we've had many new economies. In the 1920s, oh my gosh, radio. There was a company called Radio Corporation of America, RCA, it's still around, but it's part of another company now. Radio Corporation of America, the stock was so high, it has never, we still have radio, we still have RCA, but the stock has never been that high again because the new economy was so exciting. We had telephones, radio, electricity. Oh my gosh, we had electricity. The one time we had the railroads. Oh my gosh, the railroads were going to change. It did change everything. But if you had bought railroad stocks in the bubble, you never made any money. We still have railroads all over the world, but you never made any money if you bought the railroad stocks because of the new economy of the new railroad. Clipper ships. I mean, I can go on and on. There have been many times in history when the world is changing, and this time it's different. Maybe you're right. Maybe now all of these Are the new technologies coming together? I'm sorry, I'm skeptical. I've been to this movie before. This is not my first rodeo.
Yeah, I love having that. I mean, your insight, your experience, decades worth is just so helpful at this point. For people to hear that, because you do have people who don't have your experience saying the opposite, and it's great to get that perspective.
In the late 1960s, we had a bubble around computers. Computers were the hot thing there. There was a company, a laundry, which changed its name to Joe's Computer or Computer or something. Stock skyrocketed. It was just a laundry, but they changed their name to Computer, and the stock went through the roof.
Yeah, and I still think that bubble in blockchain is still yet to happen. I think if you just put blockchain in your name, and I like that blow off top we talked about. I think blockchain is going to be the excuse for that blow off top, because it is another revolutionary technology.
Elliot, there's no question blockchain is going to change everything we know. It's going to put a lot of people out of business. But electricity changed everything we know. Electricity put a lot of people out of business. Gigantic changes, gigantic bubble. We didn't get rid of electricity. Electricity stocks are still not gigantic bubbles anymore.
So just, thinking, we talked a lot about macro and the world and, new developments and things like that, but just tactically as investors, so much, like, what are you kind of doing and positioning for in this environment?
I don't know if I'm going to get it right. I hope that I get them in right. If a blow off happens, I'm sure I'll recognize it. The problem is, bubbles and blow-offs ruin two classes of people. First of all, they ruin the skeptics. The people who say, wait a minute, this is a bubble, this is crazy. And they sell it short. They get wiped out because it goes much, much higher than anybody can expect. And then the people who get wiped out are the people who believe it. The people who say, oh, this time it's different. It's real now. This is real. Then they get wiped out because it does eventually collapse. And so many people get wiped out when they're bubbles. I don't know if I'm going to get it right. I have shorted bubbles in the past, successfully at times, but who knows if I'll get it right next time around. Timing is as I just was pointing out, timing is the horrible, horrible part of bubbles.
Yeah, that is so brilliant. And it just goes to show how the markets love pain, right? They just love, clearing people out and, causing as much pain as possible. And you're absolutely right. So you have the fundamental people getting completely wiped out, and then you have the bubble chasers getting wiped out. And then from that, there's nothing left. It reminds me of 2000 when the tech bubble crashed. Gold was in the absolute dumpster. And from there, it went up 10x when no one wanted it. Could you foresee something like that happen?
Whenever there's something that nobody wants, you should at least look. When people are saying, I am never going to buy stocks again, you should probably look. When everybody you hear says, I'll never, ever, ever buy stocks, that's a good sign. When people say gold is a fraud, get out of gold, you should at least look.
Yeah, and they're definitely saying that right now. So it's good to know. Great. And then just kind of to close out, I'm sure you read the news like everyone else and just you see the lockdowns and the craziness and the geopolitical events shifting things with China and, Russia, de-dollarization. Do you have any thoughts on kind of the geopolitical setup and where we are now? And if America will just continue to just reign supreme and the dollar will continue to reign supreme for the next kind of few years, decades? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Certainly not decades. No currency ever has stayed on top for more than 100 years or so. No country has stayed on top for more than 100, 150 years or so. We've had our period. I don't know if it's coming to an end anytime soon, but I do know that many people are looking for competitors for the dollar now, with good reason. The way an international currency is supposed to work is you can use it everywhere. Anybody can. But Washington now, if they get angry at you, they put sanctions on you and say you cannot use the US dollar. People say, wait a minute, that's not the way it's supposed to work. this is supposed to be universal and neutral. So many people are now looking for a competitor to the US dollar, as they should, because the US is changing the rules. China, Russia, India, Brazil, these are pretty big names that are looking for competitors. They'll find something. I own US dollars. I expect the US dollar to get overpriced during the next hard times, at which point I hope I'm smart enough to sell it if that happens. Where I'll put my money, I don't know. I don't have a place yet. Maybe gold, but if gold will be too high then, probably. So I don't know. I do know that these are in times, at least historically, this would say that the US, we are, as I said, we're the largest debtor nation in the world. We're overextended militarily. Those guys in Washington seem to want war with Ukraine. They want war with Taiwan. They want war with everybody. It's astonishing. America. Unfortunately, America's been around 250 years, and nearly every year we've been at war in that 250 years. It's a frightening statistic, but it's something you can look up. I think there's something like 15 or 20 years out of our history when we've not been at war with somebody. In Washington, they seem to like war. I don't particularly. I know it's no good for anybody. And I read the same press you do, and they're shouting at the Chinese, they're shouting at the Russians. Elliot, if America goes to war with China and Russia, get out of the globe. That's not a good war. That's not a good war for America to be at war with China and Russia and whoever their allies are at the same time. Yeah, we might have the Japanese on our side. That's not going to help very much against Russia and China if it comes to that. And those guys in Washington, they keep getting us into wars. Afghanistan failed, Iraq failed, Vietnam failed. We keep getting into wars. We kill a lot of people and we lose a lot of money. And yet those guys in Washington don't seem to learn their lessons.
Sounds like you're reading from like the end of the Roman Empire when they were sending all their men up to Germany just to get wiped out.
Well, as I said, this is not the first time I've seen this movie. History's pretty clear that whenever countries have gotten overextended militarily and financially and politically, it often leads to big, big changes, not necessarily for the good, maybe for the other side. It leads to good changes. The Germans had a wonderful time when Rome got overextended and went into decline and started collapsing. The Germans had a great time. The Romans didn't. Right. So be on the right side.
Yeah. And like you said, China does seem to be more disciplined economically. They're allowing things to collapse. They're not just pumping, money into the situation to try to patch it up. And that's kind of an interesting situation. If they are the big competitor and they have more fiscal discipline and are stronger economically, then it's something to look out for in the future, right?
Well, China has problems, of course, but as you point out, they are letting people collapse. At least they say they are. And there's evidence so far is they are letting some people fail, which is great. Great for China, great for the world. I hope that in America, when people get overextended, we'll let them collapse. But that's not what Washington does. They say, oh, don't worry, we'll take care of you. Well, we're already the largest debtor nation in world history. I hope they'll take care of me.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank you so much for your time. So valuable. Do you have any kind of closing remarks for the audience, just to help them out a little bit?
Elliot, I would say again that everybody should become knowledgeable. You have said a few times, these are interesting times or whatever. You use various adjectives, and they are. These are very, very tumultuous, crazy times, which you said a couple of times. So whatever's happening, please become aware and knowledgeable of what's happening. But if you become knowledgeable, you'll get worried. And if you get worried, you might get prepared and you might survive all of this. There were people who made fortunes in the 30s. Most people got wiped out. But the people who knew what was going on, and you can go back to many economic collapses, there were always some who got it right and made a lot of money. But they were the ones who understood the world, and they understood what was going on, and they were prepared. So get prepared and maybe you'll survive. I hope I survive.
Excellent. Thanks, Jim. So where can people go to just learn more and find you online or?
Well, I don't have anything to sell. I don't have any website or anything. I'm just a simple person. I haven't published any books in a while. I've had some bestsellers in Japan. They're in Japanese, so I don't know what they say. I know what I said, but since I don't read Japanese and Korean, but I don't read Korean either. So who knows if they were translated properly.
Wow. So no angle, no message. You're not trying to sell anything, just, what you believe. Thank you so much for stopping by.
It's my pleasure. Let's do it again sometime.
This discussion is for informational purposes only. Nothing in this discussion should be taken as investment advice. Guests are not compensated for their appearance. Do not base any investment decisions on the information presented.